I believe that God has started Regarding Hope to be about setting the foundations for a reawakening in this city, in this nation, in this generation. Since we believe that God loves you, we want to be a church that's welcoming and inviting people with great hospitality, where people feel that it's a safe place where they can come just as they are and yet hear this message of hope for them and for their future. Some of the pieces that I believe He's uniquely called us to cultivate are cover-to-cover Bible reading in our people, gathering people to pray together for God to move, not just in our gatherings, but in our city and our nation, seeing people turn to Jesus and be saved and transformed. We currently exist as one church in multiple locations.
At Rehope Belfast, we have such a passion and a desire to see all people, the youngest to the oldest, raised up as prayers, as intercessors.
Here in Rehope West End, we believe God's calling us to be a church that reaches and raises up Jesus followers in the next generation, whether that's kids, teenagers, young adults, students. We also believe God's calling us to be a resourcing church that does send people out.
At Rehope Southside, our vision is to create a space that truly hosts the presence of God, so that anyone, whether they are kids or adults, people in our community can come in and they can have a real and true experience with Him.
The vision for Rehope Royston is essentially simple. We want to be a church fellowship, a church community that really can be seen for our love for each other and our love for that neighbourhood.
All we knew really when we moved to Glasgow in 2003 was that God was calling us to start a church. So we tried, and we started a church in our own home in 2003 and completely failed. About 6 months after that, we started meeting in a rented church building on Great George Street. After 8 months, we had 8 people in the room. Things were not going well. So I spent Saturday, September 24th praying. On that day, I asked God, okay, God, I've been here for 2 years and I have not seen or heard of anybody coming to Christ. Do you still want to do something here? The next day was a Sunday, and we saw 2 people come to Christ on that Sunday, and for the next 7 weeks, we saw at least 1 person come to Christ every week, and I really believe that that was the real beginning of the church, where God breathed, confirming this call to be a praying people, a Bible people, getting His heart, His mission, and seeing that He really does want to reawaken this city and this nation.
It was definitely challenging in those early years with a young family in a new city, but it became increasingly clear that God was at work establishing His church.
When God called us to be a praying church in September 2005, didn't really know where to go with that and how to bring that together. And yet God used some crisis after crisis to start bringing us together as a people to seek God. One example would be in 2009, we lost our location with 2 weeks' notice. And so our church rallied together and just started praying and seeking God for breakthrough. We saw God provide within 2 weeks, a place for us to meet. And it wasn't great. In fact, the next season was just wandering from place to place and trying to find a home.
I literally was away for one summer and came back, and we weren't in the same building again. We were meeting in the QMU. But the thing that I remember learning through all of it, and I was a student at the time studying theology, like that God is a faithful God, and that no matter where we met, the strong themes and the vision and the values of the church stayed the same. We were a praying church. We were a church that read the Bible.
We really established a family sense of, like, this is about us and this is about us meeting with God. It's not just about the facility. But obviously the facility challenges made it difficult for us really to grow and to thrive in the things that we really believe in.
We were praising Him for His provision week by week and month by month, but we were desperately seeking the answer of a permanent home for us and for our church. When I woke up on the 4th of December 2010, I had no idea what God was about to do. What I saw was that there was snow everywhere, and I wasn't able to be about my plans for the day. And so instead, this church building came to mind that I didn't know anything about. So I slipped and slid my way around the corner to this church, and there was an old guy there named John Silver who showed me around the building. And after a short period of time, I was able to meet with their leaders. They said that their church was valued at $150,000, which I thought, that's an amazing deal. But after after a few chats, they came back to me and said, how much do you have? And I said, we have 50,000 pounds. And they said, well, we would like to honor God and sell you our building for 40,000 pounds so that you can be debt-free and carry on with the ministry that God's put on your heart.
When Brian came home and told me that the church wanted to sell their building to us for 40,000 pounds, I think I cried for 2 weeks. I was just so full of joy over what the Lord had done in giving us a physical space, a home.
Once we landed in this place that we could start to call home, the unity just fast-tracked to a whole nother level, and the sense of family and joy around a space and what a place that can be home became even more of a reality.
I remember us walking through our new building for the first time and having such a strong sense from God that He wanted to bring reawakening. And that is what we've seen in that building over the years. We've seen so many people who have come to know God in that place.
After years of praying and seeking and saving and searching, God provided this building in the West End for a fraction of its value so that we could be debt-free, put down roots, and just be released to be about the mission that God had placed in our hearts.
It was the end of the summer of 2015, and I just had this real sense that God was laying it on our hearts to plant a church, and specifically to plant a church in Belfast. Brian was my mentor at the time, and I dropped in this one-line email, which all it said on it was, Rehope, Belfast, ? Blunt and to the point.
We never would have strategically thought, okay, when we start a second Rehope location, where should it be? It should probably be in Belfast.
I spoke to the elders. We started praying and seeking God on this one. Josh was praying and seeking God. And we all concluded that, yes, this was a God moment, and we were going to say yes and go for it, even though it was the biggest challenge we had yet faced when it came to expanding.
We held our first interest evening in Belfast. I flew from London to Belfast. Brian came over from Glasgow. And we just put it out there on social media, not knowing who would show up. And like nearly 30 people came. And suddenly this dream, this thought, this call became a reality. And we started to gather. And the first couple of gatherings were me downstairs with a Bible, Ruth and my son Reuben, who was one. They were the welcome team. And through this time, like God was just moving in an amazing way. More people showing up, getting connected into Bible read-through groups, things looking more and more like a traditional Sunday service with prayer and worship. And ever since then, we've just been riding this wave of God's favor, of great people getting involved, lost people being saved, people being baptized. And it's just been this great, great move of God.
It's hard to believe what God's brought together in Belfast in such a short period of time. I just love what God's doing in Belfast.
As we settled into our new building, we saw God's kingdom come in amazing ways. God spoke to us about a season of prodigals returning to Him, and then it happened, like loads of people who had previously been walking with Jesus but had fallen away, coming back in, their hearts being reawakened and them dedicating their lives again to Him. And then God spoke of a season of salvations, and then that happened. Dozens of people who had been lost coming in, meeting Jesus, giving their lives to Him and being transformed. We saw healings, we saw miracles. We know couples who had been told by doctors they would never have kids, and yet praying and asking God for a miracle, and then having miracle children. All of this incredible stuff was going on, and all along the church continued to grow and expand until that building was filled to capacity.
We were amazed at how fast God filled up the West End. The kids' spaces overflowing. It was uncomfortably full.
I always said to people that if you wanted to know why we needed more space, you needed to just volunteer on the kids' team on a Sunday morning when the sun was streaming in through the windows and it was hot and it was full and the partition wall was across, but it was still really noisy because there were just too many kids. Then you're like, okay, right, this room is full to overflowing. If this kids' ministry is going to grow and if more kids are going to come, then we need more space as a church.
I started 2018 feeling broken and desperate for God's help and direction. For 6 years, we'd not just been praying hard, but trying to pursue purchasing different church buildings. Spent the first couple weeks of that year fasting and praying. The church joined in fasting and praying. The elders, the staff praying and fasting for God's clarity.
And I think we'd always made the assumption that God would want to move our whole church to a bigger location that we could grow in, and then from there start lots of smaller locations in the city. God made it really clear that actually that was not the order He wanted to do this in.
Came out of that time of prayer and fasting believing that God was going to be opening doors all around Glasgow to start other locations, and instead of one central location, multiple locations around the city. At the end of May, I had a prophetic word spoken over me about multiple locations, again, confirming what I'd been hearing in January. And the next day, this opportunity came available for a church on the south side, way out of our previous zone of searching for a location. But because of the prophetic word, because of the words during the fasting week, decided to see if God was in this next step expansion. Over the course of that summer, we pursued that Southside location. We made an offer. Ultimately, the offer was accepted, and we moved towards the purchasing of the building with the massive challenge of now coming up with the finances to purchase this building.
I was totally bought in with the vision of multiplication, and I guess ready and excited to see how God was going to provide for us in that moment when we just needed Him more than ever.
We spent the rest of 2018 into 2019 very aware of the massive challenge before us, and yet completely convinced that God was leading us to this opportunity in buying this building. And so we prayed, we fasted, we did everything in our own efforts to fundraise and to make it possible. And yet we found ourselves in our fasting week in January, looking around the room saying, how is God going to provide the rest of the money that is needed? Within a day, God moved. The cost that was needed to buy the building was reduced, and almost immediately we got keys and we were able to move in and start working in that place.
If someone asked me to recount all the miracles I've seen in my life, there's not many things that I would say quickly, that was a miracle. But this was one thing that actually there was no denying it. Like that money, that amount of money, that quickly, during our prayer and fasting week, as we looked into the year ahead and what God was asking us to do and where God was leading us, like that was a miracle. It was like the final reminder we needed as we went into what was going to be just a crazy season of getting these buildings ready, that God's the one who is providing for us. God's the one who is still answering our prayers, and He's the one who we need to look to in all of these moments.
Over a 3-month period of time, then we were able to purchase and renovate the Southside location and get those doors open, and then also completely update and renew our West End location and see that have a new era, a new beginning as a church.
While we're working towards making Rehope Southside happen, we received an invitation from a church in Royston to start a Rehope location there, which practically was the worst time for us. And yet, we really felt like God wanted us to not be close to that, even though it was bad timing to us. We sought God, we put together a team, and He made it possible to start a third location in Glasgow, in Royston.
God is on the move. There's something that God is doing, that God's birthing, this kind of renewal in the church, a desperation for prayer, a hunger for His word, that we're seeing in our churches in Belfast and in Glasgow. But as I talk to other pastors, there's just this great desire for renewal of the churches.
It's humbling and special to be a part of what He's doing in our generation.
God has called us to be a church for such a time as this, pushing into the spaces and places in society where people are desperate to hear God's word, desperate for His voice. They're hungry for community. And that's what we're about.
In this journey, we have been humbled, we have been amazed, our faith has been stretched, but we really believe that God is calling us to be a church that lays the foundations for a long-lasting reawakening in this land. And it's been amazing watching the opportunities that God has given us as we have joined with Him in His heart for what He wants to do in this land.
We're excited about what God has done in our church and putting us in different locations, but more so we're excited about what God has been teaching us about prayer and hearing and trusting Him, and then seeing the impact that is having on the people who are coming to the different locations as they're learning that God still hears prayers and that He can still be trusted for them and their situations and their futures.
Looking back, it is so humbling to see how much the Lord has done, thinking about that one-way ticket to Scotland. And now here we are, and the Lord is at work, and He is moving through His church.